Afternoon and welcome back. We will continue with our second session here in the afternoon. My name is Christopher Lindholm and I'm the chair of the WMA Medical Ethics Committee. I'm a consultant in anesthesia and intensive care in Sweden. And I have the honor to co-moderate this session with Laura Palazzini, and she will introduce herself.
Okay, thank you so much. The honor is mine. And I'm Laura Palazzani. I am professor of philosophy of law at Lumsa University. I am in the steering committee at the Pontifical Academy for Life.
So these afternoon sessions will explore the ethical challenges of equal representation in biobank research. During the newly adopted Declaration of Helsinki, we had a lot of discussion during the expert meetings of how to have more equal research with human participants. This question also needs to be discussed, as we have seen in this morning here in during the revision of the Declaration of Taipei. First of all, I would also like to thank our host, the Pontifical Academy for Life, for having us here in the Vatican City. And I leave the floor to you, Laura.
Thank you. So that's a really very important topic because we are living a profound transformation of medicine. Think about precision medicine and AI and cross-border research. And so we need to face these new challenging ethical and legal questions. And we all talk about the lack or the not enough representativeness of biological samples or data, but this problem still persists and it's going to grow, so we need to face it. And I participated in a very interesting conference before the review of a Declaration of Helsinki that was devoted to vulnerability. And still we have lots of vulnerability also in this field of biobanks and data and big data. And so the real problem is to face the question, who is vulnerable? We know existential vulnerability, situational vulnerability, and all the problems related to age, sexual difference, ethnical origin, socioeconomical condition, health literacy. And we need to understand who is included and who is excluded from research in order to realize justice. In this morning we discussed a lot about justice, fairness, equity, and so we are talking now in a very concrete way on who are the ones excluded and which are the barriers in order to overcome them and include everyone in research.
Yes, a very interesting topic. And I have the pleasure and honor to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Oren Caspi, who is an MD, PhD, FISC. He's an Israeli cardiologist, physician scientist, and cardiovascular innovator. He directs the Heart Failure Unit and Cardiovascular Research and Innovation Center at Rambam, and serves as chair and founding president of the Israeli Young National Academy of Science in Medicine. His work combines heart failure care, cardiac rehabilitation, stem cell and organoid platforms, and data science. During COVID-19, he advanced data-driven tools to identify socioeconomic disparities in vaccine uptake and guide target public health interventions. His current focus on iPSC-derived cardiovascular organoid biotwins, AI-enabled biobanks and equity-oriented precision medicine. Dr. Caspi, I give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Can I have the clicker, please? Oh. Fantastic. So thank you for the invitation for this important conference. So I'll cover today 3 main subjects. Most of them are my research focus. So I will talk about the reality, so the current status and trends of underrepresentation, the risks and opportunities for using AI and data science for equity promotion, and I'll try to introduce you a little bit to the next generation biobanks. I'm using organoids, and we think of organoids as biotwins, our biotwins, and as village in a dish when we're talking about heterogeneity in population, and clinical trial in a dish. So health disparities are preventable differences in health outcomes and healthcare access that adversely affect specific populations. These disparities manifest in disease prevalence, mortality rates, and the quality of clinical care received. And there are different health disparities. One of the most common one is socio-environmental barriers like low socioeconomic status that can be manifested by different levels of education, income, or occupation. Importantly, under-reserved rural populations have healthcare disparities. Of course, racial and ethnic minority population. Very important topic is people with disabilities. And of course, there are gender inequalities and also sexual minority groups. And what is the current status? So we all understand that we have a poor status currently. Regarding clinical trials, 78% of the FDA drug trial participants are white. Let's talk about Alzheimer's for a bit. The risk for Alzheimer's is twice the median, the risk for black population and Hispanic population. But only 2.6% of the black populations are participating in Alzheimer's trials. So this is a dramatic underrepresentation. And we can talk about the exclusion of pregnant individuals and women in cardiovascular research. This is my topic. So we have much less women in cardiac trials. And we all think about, when we talk about mitigation of inequalities, we think that it will cost a lot of money. But actually, the cost of inequalities is very high. So we lose money by allowing inequalities. We lose money as life days. We estimate that this comes from the national academies. So they estimate $11 trillion per year cost for social disparities. We actually miss our targets in clinical trials. They are much less accurate because they are underrepresented. So 55% of the trials are actually wrong because they do not include the entire population. And of course, we have compromised the generalizability of our findings if we are using underrepresented populations. So this is the current status, but are we improving? So not so much. So look at the trends for white participants in studies. They are stable. They are very high and stable. Older population, a similar trend. We are including older population in our trials, and the trend is not improving. So we are not in a good trend for improvement. What about biobanks? So I think that this is very important. We really appreciate, the knowledge that we gain from biobanks. But the UK biobank, for example, and this is a large biobank, we really appreciate it, But the participation rate for the UK Biobank is only around 5%. And there is a demographic skew. There are older individuals, more likely to be female, from less deprived areas, mostly from white ethnicity. And of course, there is a healthy volunteer gap. So they have 50% less mortality than the general population. So we have a biobank of healthy individuals, and we want to treat the sick ones. So they have healthier lifestyles, they smoke less, they are less obese, they drink alcohol less. So this is a huge problem. And I think I was struck by these graphs when evaluating the mortality in the UK Biobank. So look at it, the UK population is in the solid area, the solid lines. So the mortality for the UK population is pretty high for men and women, and the x-axis is the age. Look at the UK Biobank. The mortality for UK Biobank population is much lower. And I call this a representation gap. This is the mortality gap. This is striking. So we have currently a representation gap in mortality. So one suggestion for revision is that to ensure that health databases and biobanks equitably benefit society and do not exacerbate existing health disparities, custodians must actively implement recruitment strategies that prevent systemic selection biases, such as healthy volunteer paradox, and promote comprehensive demographic representativeness. I think that when we design study, we talk a lot about our biobanks, we talk about the sample size. I think the problem is not the sample size. I think that the sample content is the most important thing. So it is systematic absence, who is invited, who is recruited, who is measured, followed, recontacted, and benefits. This is the most important thing. And we need to implement tracking methods. We need tools for measurement, like the Jensen-Shannon distance tool. We need to have longitudinal assessment of the participation, and we need to solve the representation gaps. We need to defeat the healthy volunteer bias. So governance arrangements shall mandate the continuous longitudinal assessment of participant demographics to identify and address representation gaps over time, ensuring that historically underrepresented populations are meaningfully included and share equally in the benefits of scientific advancement. So how can data science, this is the second topic, and artificial intelligence improve inclusion and representation? So before telling you about the potential mitigation by artificial intelligence, I want to talk about the risks. Can AI aggravate the situation? And I think that we underscore this issue, the new underrepresentation risk. So actually, large language models that we all use, the interaction with large language models are our most powerful biobanks of patient data. They are becoming a living stream of patient-reported outcomes. Most of the knowledge we gain are from patient-reported outcomes using those LLMs that are trained on those prompts. The worries, the symptoms, the preferences, the barriers, and trust signals. And we know, okay, but those streams are socially selective. And we know, this is a fantastic paper about the AI gap. We know that low socioeconomic populations use less the LLMs and the AI methods. So actually, those AI methods, those large language models, are trained for the high socioeconomic populations. So this is a disparity that is undergoing and is not addressed, but our LLMs are trained for the high socioeconomic status population. And I think that LLM models and AI appears to be patient-centered, while they systematically centering the patients who are easiest to digitize. So the core risk is that the denominator of AI health data is not the population. It is the population with access, literacy, confidence, and reasons to interact. But let's go again. We can use AI to help us. So I would like to think about the architecture of inclusion using AI. We can use AI to measure representativeness, indices by age, sex, ancestry, geography, socioeconomic status, disability, and language. We can predict, we can find the groups at highest disease burden but low participation in trials or in registers or biobanks, and predict recruitment barriers. And we can intervene, we can adjust site selection, we can outreach using AI, we can use teams and consent formats using AI, all in order to improve the inclusion using AI, and it's all can be in a framework of closed loop equity analytics. And when thinking about this, I think that we can allow better recruitment and lowering the barriers to entry for clinical trials and biobanks using AI. We can validate and mitigate the representation gap using AI, and we can use different frameworks for ethical use of AI in order to improve those barriers of representation. So a suggested revision, AI systems integrated into biobanks, clinical registries, and clinical trials should adopt equity-aware data governance and function as active ethical tools that systematically detect underrepresentation, ease access for low SES population, assess unmet clinical needs, and initiate target corrective actions. And I want to tell you the story of the use of data science in the COVID-19 vaccine rollout in Israel. As you all know, Israel was the first country to roll out COVID vaccines, and we had the privilege to help in using data science in order to redirect the vaccines to the most vulnerable populations. So in Israel, we got the vaccines and we had equal distribution. But as far as we started the rollout of the vaccines, we understood that there are differences. The actual vaccine uptake was for high socioeconomic status groups, and the low socioeconomic status groups that were most vulnerable did not take the vaccines. They were hesitant to take the vaccine. And this is a lesson we all learned. Equity is not achieved by opening the door equally. Equity requires knowing who is least able, least willing, or least reached, and then acting. And this is the picture that we first noticed when we evaluated the vaccine uptake in Israel. So on the x-axis, you see the socioeconomic status, and to the right, this is a better socioeconomic status. And then in the y-axis, you see the vaccination rates, and you can note that people with low socioeconomic status had much lower vaccination rates. And in addition to that, those people in the lower socioeconomic status, in the lower vaccination rates, were from the cities and the communities that were with the most prevalent active COVID-19 cases, and they were most vulnerable. So they needed the vaccine much more than those that took the vaccine. Okay. So actually what happened is that they had a double hit. So they have active high cases of COVID-19, low vaccine uptake, And we understood that the vaccination rate was strongly associated with the socioeconomic status. So we needed to act upon this data very fast. There were weeks in order to act upon to improve the situation. There is latency or lag in the, okay. So we generated a tool, a data science tool that took several parameters, but these are the main parameters. The threat parameters, the active 19 COVID cases, those high vulnerability for severe disease of communities due to comorbidity risk and aging, so we took that. And of course the shield, the percentage of vaccination in relevant ages over 60. We generated a ratio, a vaccination need ratio, and we navigated the vaccines according, with the Ministry of Health, according to the VNR, the vaccine need ratio. And this is the picture we saw. Initially, there was this trend between CES and vaccine uptake, but when we activated the tool, we got more and more vaccination in those low socioeconomic status places, and this got improved significantly. Sorry. So I think that data science did not merely describe the disparity, it created an equity compass. Who is at the greatest risk, who is least protected, and where intervention must go first. So we can use data science to solve those disparities. And the suggestion the relevant suggestion, data science and AI algorithms should be purposefully designed as an equity compass that translates the ethical principles of inclusion and public benefit into operational public health tools, ensuring that resources are redirected to populations experiencing the greatest risks and lowest protection. Finally, I want to introduce you to the next generation biobanks. These are the organoid biotwins. So we can now generate from human pluripotent stem cells, from our own stem cells, our organoids. We can generate hearts, kidneys, and so on in the lab, and we can use them as surrogate for clinical discovery and trials. So the FDA actually suggested a paradigm shift from animal models to organoids biotwins. These are our not digital twins, these are our biotwins. And this is in September 2022, the FDA launched the FDA Modernization Act 2, which actually encouraged pharma companies to focus on organoids for drug discovery and toxicity screening. And in 2025, they actually launched that they are phasing out of animal studies and are using AI and organoids as a surrogate for that studies. And when we generate organoids from our human iPS, we can generate any organoid, we need to think about it as a village in a dish. We need to include the entire heterogeneity of population into that dish. We can think about clinical trial in those dishes. So currently, phase 0 clinical trials are planned to be conducted on organoids instead of animal studies. And we should include underrepresented populations in those organoid platforms. So biobanks are evolving into functional human platforms, including iPSC, induced pluripotent stem cell banks, organoid biotwins, village in a dish, and clinical trials in a dish. As these systems may guide drug discovery, toxicity testing, AI development and regulation, they must mandate equitable representation across gender, ancestry, race, ethnicity, disease subtype, and relevant determinants of health. Without such governance, next-generation biobanks may reproduce existing inequalities rather than correct them. So just to summarize, we need to think about the current reality. We need to overcome the biases. We have a healthy volunteer bias in our biobanks. We need to include much more heterogeneous population in our clinical trials. We need to find ways to use AI and data science as equity compass to help us in including those populations. And we need to think about the next generation biobanks in order to use future-proofing inclusion in those biobanks. I would like to thank you, and I will love to have questions later on.
So now I introduce Professor Heidi Stensmeyer. She's a Swedish physician specialized in anesthesiology and intensive care medicine. She was president of the World Medical Association in 2022 and 2023, and chair of the World Medical Association in Medical Ethics Committee. She has been engaged in the revision of a lot of very important documents, among them the Declaration of Helsinki and the International Code of Medical Ethics. She was president of the Swedish Medical Association. She held a senior position in the Swedish regulatory and healthcare authorities at Karolinska University Hospital. And she serves as medical director of Tandem Health, a Swedish health tech company developing AI-based clinical tools. She is engaged in regulatory framework development on health data at the European level, including work related to the European Health Database. I give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a bit more impressive than it actually is, but thank you so much. Thank you for this wonderful day. It's been very interesting so far. I hope there are some biobank register holders out there. I know of at least one. And from my perspective, I'm very much a clinically based physician, and my perspectives are those primarily. I've moved from being part of clinical research, going to research in biotechnology, and then over to health tech, now working with AI as well. And to my disclosure, I am medical director at Tandem Health, working with AI assistance towards healthcare. Is there something? Okay, thank you. So I would say, first, I would like to thank the World Medical Association for its work. It's been very important for me as a clinician of the world, the years, helped me in decision making, and many of the frameworks are physician-oriented. I would thank the Israeli Medical Association for the work with the revision. It's been a lot of work. And a special thank to the Pontifical Academy for Life for hosting these meetings, but also former meetings and regularly offering a platform for discussions. We live in challenging times again, and will probably do so for many years. Many ask for global governance, and so has been done today, but there are very few that can offer global governance. And having discussed ethically challenging topics for centuries is remarkable and provides a lot of support to the global governing structure that we need. So a brief general comment on the Declaration of Taipei. I'll see. I'll just heads up, I'm going to address these paragraphs in the Declaration of Taipei. You can read them and reflect upon them. More is coming. It's very individual, physician-focused. This has been good, maybe adequate and timely. It reflects the personal accountability and also the impact of physicians. But in today's context, it would be impactful to address institutions more. We do act in a context. If we want to have impact on how everyone handles data security and research and biobanks, we should also try to widen the scope. Health inequality is one of society's biggest challenges, and the trend is not a reduced gap as we saw, it's actually getting wider. Transparency is good, so some AI models and large language models also expose the gap more, makes it more transparent, but it's also thereby undermining or risk undermining trust in society. If our current system is making the inequality increase, then will I have trust in the system? It doesn't work for me. So this is something we need to handle. This will also be a compensatory mechanism handling the effects of inequality. So I'm an ICU doctor by training, and I used to handle those who kind of speak for themselves. They cannot tell me their story. They cannot give informed consent. So I have been challenged with this over the years, and that's one of my, one of the reasons I've been engaged in ethical frameworks of research. They are, nevertheless, totally dependent on the knowledge we have gained over the years from others, from research. So this has been challenging. And again, informed consent is important, but it is challenging when we cannot include those individuals in research. This is a paradox, what we see, the integrity paradox. They are protected by law, but invisible in research, and that doesn't speak only for unconscious individuals, of course. And we do, in the Declaration of Taipei and Declaration of Helsinki as well, commit to inclusion, to equity, to research that benefit all of society. And yet population in many ways that are most in need of this research are structurally invisible in our databases or structurally excluded from trials thereby. So, if we don't know that there are vulnerable groups are underrepresented in registers, and if that's biobanks, health databases, or other registries, they're also underrepresented in novel therapies and evaluation of functionality of care as well. It mentioned the healthy volunteer bias was mentioned earlier. And that's something we know very well, and therefore we need compensatory mechanisms to handle this. We have developed some. It was very interesting to listen to the former speaker. I think that we will have better ones in the future. I will lift up two populations then in this. So let's see. I will just, before I go to the next one, the compensatory mechanism, I would also say a general comment is that the Declaration of Taipei is heavily front-loaded. They are focused on inclusion, protection of individual, and this is of course important. However, there would be a benefit to balance this today, partly to enable inclusion of individuals which are underrepresented, but also due to the rapid development of the utilization of data, development of new treatments, and enabling of precision medicine. How can we provide precision medicine if we do not have some data on individuals? We do, of course, have data on individuals, but we need more data and different forms of data. I'm going to show an example. Treatments programs can be adjusted to special needs and better fit the individual if the individual needs are identified. And the next also, the question of ownership, accessibility to data, source, storage is also a pressing issue. It's not highlighted, it's mentioned, but not highlighted very much. Might be to consider. And also the robustness of the handling of data. And since I'm working with AI assistants, robustness of the system handling the data is very, very important. So I don't think we should add more restrictions to protect people from inclusion, but remove structural barriers, preventing the most vulnerable. So here is the law, the GDPR. You cannot register racial or ethnical origin, and this is of course very important in EU. On the other side, we don't have the information in the data. We cannot identify an individual and individuals and design accordingly, which is a bit of an inclusion failure. I'll jump a little bit. So I would just give an example of that I've experienced myself. I tried to put up a program for surgical reconstruction for mutilated women from Somalia living in Sweden. But even if we knew that they were fairly close to us, we were not capable of identifying them because we were not eligible to register ethnicity and background in that way. We were not able to identify them due to socioeconomic status either, because they were not registered anywhere. So this was very challenging. Sweden has some of the world's most remarkable health registers. Swedish cause of death register is an unbroken and complete record running from 1749 and is complete since 1749, but does not have any information on minority or ethnicity. Has never had. So it's like a dual failure. First, we have difficulties including, they will not be seen, and researchers cannot identify or actively recruit minority individuals to compensate for this because they are not seen. So this is a problem on an individual level, but it's shown very clearly in a global level. And the UK Biobank was mentioned here earlier. It's one of the most celebrated biomedical resources in the world, but 94.6% are white participants. So it's challenging to use. So one compensatory mechanism that I wanted to highlight is my colleague Theo Bedin at the Karolinska Institute. They did this trial, Index of Multiple Deprivation in Sweden, measuring area-level socioeconomic inequalities, something that is not natural in the registers, but they managed to, after an ethical approval, to register housing, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, education, and so on, and thereby they could map out vulnerable areas and thereby then give advice on where society could have more incentives, more stimulatory incentives. So this is an important one. Here, I won't dwell long on this one, but the gap is structural. As I said, UK Biobank highly tilted towards white participants. US clinical trials and biobanks are better in registering ethnicity, so probably will be better in reflecting society. And also, we know that we know about the healthy volunteer bias that's also reflected in clinical trials. There are more white educated included in clinical trials, and thereby we had a declaration gap. We do have, in paragraph 8, research should contribute to the benefit of society, in particular public and health objectives. Well, then we also need to include those, of course. And governance must ensure participation and inclusion. Yeah, but then how? The challenge here is implementing this. It's not done by itself. This one, just one more, cervical cancer screening, associated factors in Africa. Is clearly connected to information, if you are informed, and to education and access to healthcare. So we have a few compensatory solutions. Self-reported health data is widely used more and more. It's not without challenges, but it works. Community partnerships models, this also, if you have trusted community and help out and also ask and reach out to people, they will more likely be included. And then also the transparency of purpose, which is extremely important, of course. This. 2 more minutes. Clinical reality. I think I got 2 more minutes. I'm gonna jump directly to AI, large language models, amplify the biobank research challenge. Yes, we do have huge possibility in AI, and I fully share the views of the former speaker. With new models, we can solve several problems, but we also can amplify the problem in inclusion, because the large language models are vastly trained on huge data, on English-speaking populations, and so on. So we can just amplify the bias in the whole also. It's just as good as the data it's trained on. But we can do through compensatory mechanisms, we can adjust for this. Then lastly, I would say then, so which one would I address here? 1 more minute. Paragraph 6. I would say this is the physician focus. No national or international ethical, legal, or regulatory requirements should reduce or eliminate any of the protections for individuals and populations set forth in this declaration. We should consider acknowledging collective and institutional responsibility alongside individual physician responsibilities. It's difficult for an individual physician to have the total impact. We need to address institutions as well. Paragraph 10, I would point out. Confidentiality. Trust requires more than confidentiality. It requires transparency of purpose, I would say. I think we should be more focused on that. And there come the commercial interest as well. Yeah, there is commercial interest in a lot of the registries and biobanks. Paragraph 12, data and material are made non-identifiable. This is the wording, paragraph 12. I think the wording of the last sentence of paragraph 12 is difficult. The wording risks reading as irrevocable, so it might be difficult to recruit individuals. The second last, paragraph 16 and 18 they address the ethics committees. Ethics committees has been widely discussed in the Declaration of Helsinki. We have discussed it many times. Independent is never defined. What do we mean by independent? Very challenging. It's very challenging today also. I can elaborate on that later. And the last one, paragraph 20 and 24, accountability. So custodians of health databases and biobanks must be accessible and responsive to all stakeholders. We can be accessible and responsive, but is that the same as accountable? Maybe look into that wording and elaborate a little bit on it. Thank you so much. That was 30 seconds over. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. And for those who have questions, please keep them until the discussion later on, as we move on to the last speaker. And I have the pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. William F. Sullivan. He's a family physician with a PhD in philosophy. Since 2023, he has held the Joseph P. Kennedy Senior Chair in Bioethics at the Kennedy Institute of Ethics, Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. Dr. Sullivan is also a professor in the Department of Family Medicine, Georgetown University School of Medicine. Dr. Sullivan's clinician and scholarly focus is on elucidating, practicing, and teaching an approach to healthcare and ethics, especially with people with intellectual and developmental diseases, guided by a foundational method for bioethics. Dr. Sullivan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Good. So I want to thank the organizers of this meeting for inviting me. I'm honored and delighted to share a few thoughts with you on these 5 topics for discussion. My comments are informed by my background as a generalist clinician, researcher, longstanding member of a research ethics review board for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and my ethical research that focuses on people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So just to clarify who I'm talking about when I refer to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, it's people, first of all, who with the right caring supports can have a flourishing life. This is in the context of atypical neuropsychological development before adulthood that results in varying degrees of lifelong challenges to cognitive, adaptive, and/or social skills. So it includes those with a diagnosed genetic condition, such as Down syndrome or Fragile X syndrome, people without a known cause for their condition, and depending on where you are, that could be from 50 to 20% of this population, and also autistic people who may or may not also have an intellectual disability. So I've been involved in developing with others guidelines. This particular issue is the third version of these guidelines that was led. They're kind of consensus guidelines on the care of adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And the things that we're talking about is relevant also because I'm involved with others in updating and internationalizing these guidelines. And just as a historic note, when we updated the guidelines and published the 2018 version, we benefited greatly from research by colleagues who were able to link various sources of administrative health data in 2013 to have a cohort of adults with intellectual disabilities of 66,500. And at that time, that was the largest such cohort for epidemiological studies on this population in the world that we were aware of. But this involved at least a year of expensive and complex legal negotiations with different ministries of the government in our province of Ontario to link data due to privacy concerns, such as those that are highlighted in the Declaration of Taipei. Still, it was anonymous data, and it was not linked to electronic medical records, nor to any biobank data, both of which at the time were largely unavailable for this group of adults. So what I want to do is sort of bring up a kind of a developmental disability perspective to this conversation. And so I'm going to poke a few bears, as we say in Canada. Some bears are a little bit more nasty than others, but I call them biases, not bears. So I want to kind of talk about certain ethical questions regarding biobanks, research, and people with intellectual disabilities. And so one of the first biases could be called a majority bias, or you could say it's a group bias. And we've been hearing this all morning. So if biobank research is systematically excluding certain populations, such as people with IDD, but others that we've heard of, because they're too small, too rarely seen, too unimportant, it raises a question of scientific validity, as we've heard, but also ethical ones. And we've been asking this question from the beginning. Whom does this research leave behind? And who will benefit from whatever we mean by the common good of such findings from this research? So this is another bear I'll poke at, another bias that I'm sure everybody in this room, this is not a new notion, but you might consider your readers, that many people might not actually appreciate this. And it's kind of another ethical question of the unintended impact of a protectionism in research ethics and in this document that we're talking about. So we have to acknowledge that research ethics developed under the shadow of certain historical examples of exploiting vulnerable groups in non-therapeutic research that was harmful. And the example that's flagged here is the Willowbrook State School study that was in the US that took place in the 1950s and 60s, over almost 2 decades, involving children with intellectual and developmental disabilities who were wards of the state and undertaking, exposing them to the virus hepatitis for research purposes, not for benefit. So as a result of such stories that are very important in our history as we talk about these things, there is a tendency to view people with intellectual and developmental disabilities as a group, as a vulnerable population in need of special protection. And when I read Articles 6 and 17 of the document, they're referring possibly to such a group. This is a necessary precaution. However, it gives rise to the mistaken assumption that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are always non-autonomous and incapable of giving informed consent to any research. Remember, this group were children. So I'm talking about adults with intellectual disabilities. So this sort of blanket assumption, you could say, is an ableist bias. And by ableism, what is meant is devaluing the capabilities of people because of their diagnosis of disability alone. And it can result in discriminatory practices. Another bear I'll poke at is to begin to think about what's the purpose or the goal of such research, and how does this relate to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So despite this 1946 holistic WHO definition of health, psychiatrist Dr. George Engels still needed in 1977 to challenge the still dominant biological model in medicine with his proposed more holistic model, which he called the biopsychosocial model of healthcare. In revising the Declaration of Taipei, do we need to think beyond ethical limits and regulations? For example, do we need also to positively affirm that the aim of biobank research should be to promote the good of biopsychosocial health and flourishing of individuals and communities? And I like the earlier discussion that called out the opposition between these two, or the presumed opposition. And are there still other domains that we can think about human health and flourishing that we should affirm, perhaps that go beyond this almost 50-year-old biopsychosocial model? And another bear I'll poke, which is actually, this is the polar bear, and I would say it's this acknowledgement of the history of societies and medicine's relationship with people with intellectual disability, that this relationship includes powerful eugenic ideologies first expounded by the physician researcher Francis Galton, 1822 to 1911. These continue to influence the ever-present tendencies in medicine and research to distinguish between us and them, and to scapegoat or otherwise dismiss the them. This bias tends to reemerge in new technologies that, according to some disability ethicists and advocates, can be used for eugenic purposes. Prenatal genetic screening and gene therapies are controversial and complex issues, which ethical biobank research cannot avoid addressing. And I'll go a bit further into these issues in a moment. But the first thing I wanted to do is just flag who are we talking about, if we even just talking about people with disabilities. So it's not an insignificant proportion of the world's global population. So it's reported about 1.3 billion people in the world live with significant disabilities. Most people that we care for in our hospitals have significant disabilities. Most of us here, before the end of our time, will experience significant disabilities and will be included in that number. But when we're talking about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, it's about 1% of the population, or about the population of Germany, 80 million. And when we think of this other category, which I include in our, at least in our guidelines, autistic people with or without intellectual disabilities, that's 62 million people. So it's not an insignificant number of people that we're talking about. And the other issues that keep coming up have to do with the fact that the vast majority of people with intellectual disabilities live in low-income and lower-income countries, and this number is growing in the lower-income countries. So that's over 80% of people that we're talking about. And finally, the ethical issues this raises is not actually equal representation, but equitable inclusion or equal opportunity of people with IDD to contribute to biobank research for benefit of self and others. But it's also about, as we've been hearing about, equitable access to the benefits of such research, and whether the results of such research that excluded mostly people with intellectual disabilities will be relevant to them. That's why we developed these guidelines, because the research that was available excluded people with intellectual disabilities. So primary care providers didn't know what was different in their care. So I guess the last thing I would say is that, let me just go to the next. And so we've heard this before. Equitable representation of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in biobank research should cut across these economic and racial divides now present in biobank research. So, for instance, there are no intellectual and developmental disability specific biobanks based in low and middle income countries, and apparently Asian, African, South American people with or without intellectual disabilities are severely underrepresented in all biobanks, despite us knowing relevant genetic variabilities, as we've heard already. I want to also return to this question of ableist bias as a potential reason for underrepresenting people with IDD and others in biobank research. And this also came up earlier. So when Georgetown University philosopher Tom Beecham drafted the Belmont Report in 1979 and subsequently published with his colleague at Georgetown University, Jim Childress, the first of 9 editions of Principles in Biomedical Ethics, both works assumed a political cultural individualism that underpinned the new bioethical notion of autonomy. That's going to be a controversial topic that we can come back to, but this is a view of this central claim that you see in this document. So recent works in ethics, however, highlight the importance of relationships in supporting the exercise of decision-making capabilities. For example, Article 12 of the 2006 UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities generally, but it includes people with intellectual disabilities, to exercise decision-making capabilities with supports as needed. So the point here is that when we're thinking about revising this Declaration of Taipei, we need to think about this new way of thinking about relational agency, that giving consent is the conclusion of a process or method of deciding. We could say that the person with IDD engages in this method of deciding in the consent in the context of relationships, researchers and family and other caregivers providing decisional supports as needed. Looking at consent in this way shifts the focus from assessing the individual's capacity for independent deciding, which I think is the assumption in this document, to the adequacy and quality of decisional supports that they are provided. So it's quite a radical shift in thinking about this. So I mentioned the 2018 guidelines that we published. It's sort of this distinction between what do you recommend and how do you implement that. To me, this is the way of thinking about dignity as equal for all, but implementing it, you have to bring in this notion of equity because everybody will have different contexts. So when it comes to decision making, we have a recommendation that all people with intellectual disabilities should be engaged in decision about their health. And this is a tool coming from that to give advice about how do you implement that. And what is missing in most people's mind is this middle category, that there is this possibility of interdependent approaches to decision making. And that's a lot of people. It's not to say that people with intellectual disabilities can't do this independently, but many people will need this sort of support, and it's legally recognized in many jurisdictions. So I want to close off by talking about flourishing, not eliminating. So this is kind of a quotation from Pope Leo, where he talked about this question of the good toward which such research involving people with intellectual disabilities and others ought to be oriented. It should be the good of promoting health and flourishing and not eliminating people with IDD. People with IDD can lead healthy and flourishing lives with proper care. Biobank research has the potential to help develop such beneficial health care, but it needs to be guided by a holistic or integral understanding of human flourishing. And as was pointed out here, which I think is kind of remarkable, it involves physical, social, cultural, moral, and spiritual. At least this is how it was articulated at that time last year. What I would qualify, rather than speak about physical, we could think about the vital level of flourishing. That's the focus mostly of healthcare. The biopsychosocial model of health includes somatic plus genetic, psychosomatic, and ecological relationships in health that, when in harmony, characterize what I would call vital flourishing. But vital flourishing, that vital level, is essential, you might say, to full integral human flourishing. It is the basic condition for attaining flourishing in other domains as those that are listed. Vital flourishing and healthcare are also influenced by these other domains. And so we've heard a lot about structures. That's a cultural issue, cultural, societal, influencing how healthcare is delivered. All these domains, therefore, are dynamically interdependent and integral to human health, understood as integral human development and flourishing. And this has implications for the type of data and other knowledge that biobank researchers should consider linking to. And I'll just give an example going back to the guidelines that were mentioned before. And this is back in 2008. So in the work with my team on this, developing the guidelines, we discovered that knowledge from other life system domains of people with intellectual disability beyond the vital were necessary for thinking about this integral human development and flourishing. For example, I've highlighted experiential knowledge. So we found that first-person accounts of people with intellectual disabilities and their caregivers of their experience of health, well-being, and healthcare were important and relevant to formulating recommendations. In particular, cultural, moral, spiritual, or religious perspectives of people with intellectual disabilities and their family were especially relevant. The potential value of biobank research for promoting such integral human development and flourishing of all people, including people with IDD, becomes distorted when such perspectives are missing and data is linked only to administrative records and to clinical records that focus on the vital domain. And this is from the most recent encyclical that was mentioned earlier this morning. With people with IDD and their caregivers, I'm hoping that the next version of the Declaration of Taipei will positively affirm that the good of biobank research is to promote integral human development and flourishing of all. Among other things, this means for people with IDD, stating that biobank research should not be put to use to develop technologies to eliminate people with so-called genetic defects from the human community. So humanity flourishes not despite limitations, but often through them. So I'll just finish with 4 kind of suggestions from this for those that will be revising the declaration. The first is to be aware of and to some extent try to purge these biased assumptions that may be part of those that are implementing biobank research that just need to be called out and in some ways challenged. That these things don't go away. They're always there, and yet one of the benefits of a document like this is actually it becomes a teaching document, and to kind of have a way of sort of naming some of these biases, not so much that you guys writing the document have, but your readers most likely have, right? And to think of that. And then, as we've all been saying, address this issue of equity for underrepresented groups. And 2 other points, think about including this notion of relational agency and interdependent deciding as a basis for consent. And then finally, specify the research benefit as preserving and promoting integral flourishing of all. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much to all the speakers, and now we have 20 minutes for discussion, so please, if you have any questions.
Thank you for all the speakers and very comprehensive presentations. And I'm from the IFAPP, one of the members of the SciAMS. And I welcome the emphasis on equity, on the proactive identification of underrepresented populations. So this is highly consistent with the principles of the justice and the inclusion that keep both in the Declaration of Taipei and the Declaration of New Helsinki. And I have a question with Professor Caspi. And you proposed that on the 3rd presentation, AI systems integrated into biobanks. So you mentioned that. I wonder whether the current wording could unintentionally be interpreted as they're granting the AI systems on autonomous governance rules. So maybe would it consider clarifying that AI should function as a decision support tool under appropriate human oversight, so which means that the human in the loop. So that's, rather than the ads that the independent actor capable of initiating corrective action. So, so thanks so much.
So thank you. I think that for all AI applications, we need human in the loop. And for conducting responsible AI, we should use AI in those tasks that can allow us to get better regarding inclusion. So one of the key cases that we can use AI is to monitor the inclusion of those underrepresented communities and populations. And I think that this is of a major importance to get a real-time, compass of the way that we include populations.
Thanks so much.
Good afternoon, and thank you to our speakers for your presentations this afternoon. My name is Jacinta Tui. I contributed to the presentation this morning with Professor Dominique Spremont. I'm from the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. So my question to you is really just to speak to you, or at least put to you, I know our agenda here is looking at the Declaration of Taipei's ethical considerations, and more specifically, we're looking at reframing this normative framework, but we can't ignore that there are structural issues, structural barriers. And I want to talk to you, or at least put you to respond to us about two aspects. One is the competence of the ethics committees, because they are often looking at these research protocols and the research that's taking place in terms of inclusion and exclusion. So who is involved in the research and who is justifiably excluded, or asking the question, why are they being excluded? And the second I want to ask, and I think just in relation to each of you that have spoken this afternoon, is the informed consent form. Because the underpinnings of that form is that the participants must provide free, voluntary, informed consent. So that form, for me, sounds like it's a barrier if we want to be more inclusive. Thank you.
Okay, so who is going to answer? Yeah.
So, exactly. Could you, thank you. I can answer. I think to your first question about the ethical committees, I think we should have, I pointed out that it is a challenge. How independent are they? Which resources are they? What's the requirements to be on an ethics committee? We do not have that. There are no global rules for that or regulatory. I've worked with so many different ethics committees, and they look very differently from country to country, and also inside a country, it looks very different. And it's very difficult also to be independent. We could say that we could possibly frame that they should have debiasing mechanisms built in, that they should always ask the question, are there any compensatory mechanisms in the structure and the design of the trial that is debiasing recruitment of individuals? That could be like a question that every ethics committee is to look into. It doesn't mean that it will debias or take away the challenging recruiting individuals, but just by highlighting the question, always the requirement to answer this as a signal would foster it, I would think. I would also say I've seen so many different ways of constructing an ethical committee, and the question about independence is very challenging. We put a lot on the individual physician and the individual ethics committee, but the context they are working in defines also their mandate and ability to act. So this, and if anyone should address this in the world, the WMA should. So that was the first, and I totally forgot your second question. Debiasing, voluntary informed consent. Yes. Yeah, I agree. There are, how many here has written an informed consent for a clinical trial, designed it? Yeah, how many? So, okay. It's kind of, it's a piece of work, right? It's a thorough piece of work, and it is to be also approved by the ethics committee and so on. And I see your point. There, it is kind of massive. And to be able to read and understand, you should be fairly educated, you should know the language very well, and so on. So thereby, it could rise the question of, are they really informed? On the other hand, the flip side of the coin, very difficult to lower the hurdle for that. I would say, it's very challenging to make it that we can make it easier there. My opinion. Thank you.
Maybe I'll just comment on that as well. So I think this is a key issue, and for me, it's a barrier. So if the Research Ethics Committee members think that by this requirement, what we're talking about is always independent decision-making capability, then that's going to exclude a lot of people that I'm talking about. But the idea here is that it need not be. It's still informed consent, but it is happening in a kind of a relational context. And it's even, the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, every state that signed up to that is presumably in agreement with this notion that this is a right that people can exercise decision-making capabilities with supports as needed. And that's what's often missing. Where's the support in order to do it? And so it's actually, it may be that in the jurisdiction where people are applying this, there is no legal basis for this. But the principle of making sure that people are involved and not excluded could still hold, even if you move to kind of having it legally sort of authorized by somebody else because it's not recognized legally. So this is where kind of the culture sets the framework of our laws under which bioethics committees are constrained. And a document like this should be able to cut over that and be critical of a culture that is actually discriminatory.
Wonderful. So sorry.
Yeah, just a quick answer. So I'm managing a large clinical trial center, and I think that the ethics committee also should revise their logics. So I always see questions about inclusion criteria, but I never saw a remark about why did you exclude this type of population. So for cardiovascular research, we exclude in most studies patients with psychiatric disease. But actually those patients are at the highest risks. Yeah. And the reason for that is that they are afraid from retention, issues. And I think that the Declaration of Helsinki should mandate that the IRBs should look at unneeded exclusion of populations from those studies.
I'm Nilza Diniz from Brazil. I'm very glad to have heard your presentation. Appreciated all of them. And Caspi, it was the first time I have heard about AI helping. I am always afraid of AI to accessing data, banks, and so on. And I'm very glad and thank you for helping me to. Also, sorry, to help me to have a positive view of AI. It's one thing, and the small, oh my God, organoid, amazing thing that can include everyone. And I'm interested on eugenic issue. My question to the doctor, you showed all the things about ages. For sure, it's very important to give some ages to not the people that have different conditions.
Yeah.
I don't want more to talk about disability. They have different conditions, and it's amazing when you put all the prejudice and bad things we do. My question: do you have an idea how can we diminish these things? Because here we are talking with people that are very interested on diminishing those things. But do you have any bet about how to convince everyone that we should not have eugenic behaviors? Thank you so much.
So that's actually the challenge of education, right? You know, all those things I named, I'm guilty of, right? And it's taken a lot of time to kind of identify them and purge them. And I think that the other comment I would make is that this example of supported decision-making is just from 2006, that UN convention. It is an example of an equity practice. So everybody should be involved in deciding about their health care, but if you have an intellectual disability, these are some extra things you need to do to ensure that they're involved. And so in a sense, it's on they've made a claim about something that should hold for everybody, but then they've also flagged that, you know, if you have an intellectual disability, there's additional things that we ought to provide to people so that they can be included. And so all of what we're talking about, it seems to me, is about implementing these principles that we hold.
Okay, Federico de Montalvo, professor of constitutional law in la Universidad de Comillas, the University of the Jesuits, the Madrid member of the Academia per la Vita, and a speaker tomorrow. It's about one brief comment and one question, very brief. It's about the vaccination strategy that in Spain, we went from, we were the country where the people said we don't want to be vaccinated. In Europe, we were at the top. 70% of the Spaniards say we are not going to be vaccinated. 1 year later, because the Spanish national strategy against COVID-19, we were at the top of the world with 95. Why? Perhaps because the Minister of Health in Spain was all the day talking about our strategy is based on ethical principles, not only on science. And the government decided to include two members of the Spanish Bioethics Committee in the group of experts, not only people from science, and also, very important, are sociologists to think about communication. Communication is very important in this matter, is the way. So I think that in Spain, people don't know a lot about science and also about ethics, but at least they think ethics are friendly. I think that the language of ethics, if we want to, I don't like, I will say tomorrow, engagement. I don't like, sorry, I like involvement. But if we are going to engage, or preferably involve, I think the language of ethics is wonderful, because the language of science now sounds so rude, so this is a problem that we need to understand. And one question, Professor Sullivan, we were talking about this thing, informed consent of people with disability, but legally and even ethically there is a change of paradigm because the New York Convention Now we need to consider capable to decide about informed consent as a normal citizens. So the presumption is not against the capacity, it's in favor. And in the case that there is a clear evidence that they don't have any capacity, is when they cannot decide that. So this idea of not including in all this kind of research is legally a mistake, considering the New York Convention, which is now being implemented in all over the world. So we need to talk about normal citizens with a disability, but fully of rights. But in some cases, we need to consider that they don't have capacity, but in some cases, there is not a group out of the political system, the human rights system. I think it's very important. Thank you, and thank you for the roundtable.
Well, we are going to the coffee break soon, but we have a couple more questions, and I urge you to be brief, so we have time for the coffee break. Leah.
Thank you very much. I have several questions. I'll make them very brief. I have several questions. I'll make it very brief just to everyone. First of all, my question is, since we've seen, and Professor Caspi has demonstrated that our biobanks and data banks are really lacking large majority of a population. We've seen this in everyone. Would you suggest at this moment that there is some advantage in having something actively to get to engage in these different populations? And do you think that maybe the word transparency at the moment was not used, but maybe if we were to say that if you are having a biobank or a database, the minimum what you need to do is to disclose who is not included in it, or just to tell us a little bit about the ratio. So this might not fix it, but at least it would bring to the surface the limitations of that biobank and database, rather than having somebody looking for it. So I'm just wondering if you see anything worthy in the idea of making it transparent, and if so, would you think that we should mention it in one way in the DOT, saying that the biobank, there is an ethical obligation to disclose the limits of it? So that's sort of my first question. And then my other question is, where would you see the different responsibility of the individual physician to achieve this? Because we can talk a general outline about the ethics, which should be, but would you see some personal or individual responsibility if a physician would like to uphold these ethical principles, or we just leave this vague, which is my second concept or second question. And then the last thing is, I think it is very clear that we do need a different framework in the structure of how it's working. At the moment, it's clear that all the health systems probably incentivize you not to use populations that are more difficult, because as you said, you need more time to get the consent and so on. So I think if we're looking, and then this would be more expensive and more time and so on. So I'm thinking maybe we also need to have some, to address the idea that we need to have a different incentive in order to actively include these populations in board. Thank you very much, and all the presentations were really great. Thanks a lot.
Maybe I'll try to answer the first question. So I think that it's very important to have a transparent system, and they should disclose, like in registries, what populations are excluded. But I think that the main tool is that we must integrate monitoring tools into those registries. So I'm adding the National Amyloidosis Registry, and I'm thinking about my own, blame in managing that registry. So I don't have an integrated tool for evaluating that I included all minorities in that. It's a national registry. So we do need to integrate monitoring tools to those registries to assure that those underrepresented populations are included. So it should be a real-time tool for evaluating. So then, the physicians will have the tools in order to address it. And I think that what you mentioned regarding incentives, it is critical to have incentives. Otherwise, it won't be possible.
Yeah. So I would say, so we have a lot of biobanks and registries out there, and some are old, some are new, some are high quality data, some are not so high quality data, some are more complete than others. So it's a jungle out there, I would say, first of all. And to improve that fairly fast, I agree with my colleague here. Some AI tools can help us adjust this, help us find the loopholes. And I agree with Leah, making it transparent, what we do not see, where we have our biggest black holes and lacks would help out, I would say. But just to wait to see and that someone else will take care of it will be difficult. So I would encourage an incentive to see over what we have and if we can have some mechanisms promoting this. I would also say that Europe has a lot of regulatory, but we do also foster through our regulatory requirements the aim, what we want. And if we want to have a more complete registry, if it's biobanks or health registry or a trial, that is a tool that we can address. It could be governance and institutional. So I would go for that, yes, I would say. But it's a jungle out there. There are some AI agents that can identify loopholes and give us information. They must, as pointed out before, have a human in the loop, have oversight, have purpose, of course. I myself, as I said, I work with AI agents, and there is no one as passionate about this as the people who really know what they can do and where the pitfalls are. And we are rooting for a strict governing structure for that. The Netherlands have just released some comments on the requirements on the MDR classifications on high-risk AI tools. Good. Sweden the same. Good. Go for it. Thank you.
So I'll just make a comment about recruiting people. And this is just a thought that came to mind. The relevance of relationships and trust. I think we're at risk of forgetting that. That everybody who's a potential kind of subject for biobank research is typically also has a relationship with somebody in healthcare that they trust to talk about these things. And I don't think AI can replace that. I think they'll make the claim that they can, but I think that is important. So this is just an example. So I have many patients with autism, and I was noticing that there's a very big autism biobank that the Australians have created, 500 and some families. And so if one of my patients with autism was to ask me about this, and I was to look at, what they were up to and what information was being given, is it trustworthy? I would wonder, does anyone mention that right now there's no prenatal screening for autism, right? We don't know the genetic basis. But it's very likely that out of this research, there will be a marker. And is that something that you would want to advise somebody who's entrusting you to give them advice about whether they should join this biobank, that is a possible outcome of this research that you should know about? I bet none of the families ever heard that. And so there's a trust issue, if that's the case, in the background here, that they might all be shocked, but that in fact, they've contributed to eliminating future generation of people with autism.
Okay, we have two last questions.
Okay. Thank you so much. Really terrific panel. My name's Carla Childers, and I head up bioethics and policy for the company Johnson & Johnson. And Dr. Caspi, I really appreciated, I always love concrete examples with the AI to helping address that vision, especially the rollout navigator. And with the pressure to use the NAMs in industry, the vision of a village in a dish. But when you describe that village and the vision and the requirement for representativeness, just wondering how we're going to overcome the problems we already have, especially with the sensitivity of some of these types of cells, and wondering, can you draw any parallels for us or give us any insights into what you learned in the vaccine rollout navigator? Do you see opportunities to learn from that and apply it to creating these villages in a dish? Because that was really impressive improvements. So maybe a little bit more commentary on that project and its connectiveness to maybe these other efforts.
Thank you. These are two separate, case studies.
Yeah.
So the vaccine navigation was mainly socioeconomic status driven, and we cannot integrate socioeconomic status into the dish. So we can integrate race, ethnicity, gender, or sex into the dish. We cannot integrate other things. But I think that people are working on this in order to create the right clinical trials in the dish to allow heterogeneity. Actually, in Israel, we have heterogeneity of the population, and we are trying to have that all included in those clinical trial and dish platforms. And I think that this is very important to have a lot of effort in order to design those platforms ahead, so we will not have, the problems that we currently have with biobanks in front of us in the future.
Okay, then we have one last question before the coffee break.
Yeah. Thank you very much. All of your talks are very valuable and very inspiring. And my name is Cheiko Kurihara, journal editor from Japan, Clinical Evaluation. And I'd like to specify one question to Dr. William Sullivan. That is, your talk is very important to talk about the cohort of, developing a cohort of intellectual disability people. I am asking, I'd like to ask you a question whether there is any mechanism of benefit sharing, developing benefit sharing mechanism in terms of shifting from biomedical model to social, human right model. That is, I am asking this because I am working at a data use authorization committee in mental illness people's registry, but there is no any possibility of benefit, returning benefit. That is because this is very much biomedical research model. But however, in other occasion, we hear many times that these people work in the working place, they are experiencing many discrimination, but they cannot speak about it. But this cannot be included in the knowledge development in the registry of the people. So how it's your idea for developing the mechanism of benefit sharing in this kind of patient registry?
Right. So I think that the main point about identifying the importance of the vital domain, which is essentially what we're talking about mainly, is that it can be separated from all those other domains. That was the main point. And that as a result, there's a distortion of what it means to flourish as a human person. And so there is that risk. Now, I don't know if you can overcome that with this sort of research, but what I was getting at by other types of evidence for, that is for, say, guidelines, it would include what we've been talking about a lot is patient and partner involvement at all levels. And so even in developing guidelines, that's become standard method. You have to do that or the guideline results are dismissed. So I think that's kind of a new development. And I guess the point about involving people with intellectual disabilities is they can speak to these other dimensions, and may even have other priorities that you didn't think about. But it is what's important to them, like well-being, right? That was a big message. And so just to think about when we're developing, revisions for this document, that notion is not just a governance issue, it's a methodological issue. And could it be built into how we think about this type of research? That there is this motto, nothing about us without us. And that's essentially what this is getting at. We're doing all this great research, it's going to benefit people with intellectual disabilities. Well, better involve them from the beginning.
Well, that concludes this session, and I want to thank all of our speakers. I want to thank my co-moderator and you, the audience, as well, for very good questions. Now we have a coffee break. That's 15 minutes, and we will be back here 25 minutes past 3.
I like poking bears.
30-second warning. Good afternoon. Welcome to the final session of the day. My name is Jeff Blackmer. I work at the Canadian Medical Association, and it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome you to this session on equity in data access sharing the benefits. And the objective of the session is to examine how benefits derived from health databases and biobanks can be shared fairly with contributing individuals and communities. This looks at moving from extractive models of research towards reciprocal community-centered benefit sharing. Unfortunately, one of our speakers, Dr. de Jong from the Netherlands, is not able to join us today, but we are very fortunate to have two distinguished speakers who will share their views on this subject with us. Myself and my co-chair, Dr. Hagai, will welcome them and introduce them, and this will be followed, as always, by a question and answer session. I have the honor of introducing our first speaker, Professor Jacques Simpore from Burkina Faso. Jacques has a very impressive and long CV that I will attempt to do justice to. He is a full professor of molecular biology, molecular genetics, and bioethics, and the honorary rector of the University of St. Thomas Aquinas. He has a PhD in molecular genetics and applied to medical sciences from the University of Brescia, and a PhD in bioethics as well from the University of Regina Apostolorum, Rome. In 2024, Jacques was appointed the president of the Burkina Faso Committee on Bioethics of UNESCO, and he has over 600 published scientific articles. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jacques Simpore. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me to this meeting. The title is Equity in Access to Biomedical Data and Equitable Sharing of Benefits toward a post-extractive paradigm of global biobanking research. Introduction. The advent of technologies such as NGS sequencing, CRISPR-Cas9, bioinformatics, and AI has transformed research and promoted the rise of precision medicine through biobanks. However, this innovation poses major challenges regarding distributive justice. To break away from extractive model, where resources from the global south exclusively benefits the global north, bioethics now demand community reciprocity and a just return of benefits. This evolution is reconfirming international ethical and legal frameworks as those the Nagoya Protocol 2010 exclude the human genome. It is fundamental principle of access and benefit sharing now permit biobanking governance. Several texts frame and regulate these practices. We have Taipei Declaration 2018, WHO Guidelines on Human Genome Editing 2021, European Recommendation 2018, American Common Rules 2019, Chinese Regulation on the Management of Human Genetic Resources 2019, Human Heredity and Health in Africa, S3 Africa 2018. Since the Taipei Declaration provides no binding ethic foundation of law, its implementation requires a hybrid normative approach, blending national and international regulation. Consequently, research is now structured around biological sovereignty, technical reciprocity, and dynamic consent. To develop this paradigm, our reflection will be structured around three main axes. First, refunding autonomy and governance consent in the face of databases. Second, distributive justice versus extractive model, the imperative of reciprocity. Third, biological sovereignty and legal enforceability. Conclusion. First point, the refundation of autonomy and governance. The Declaration of Taipei revolutionized the use of broad consent in biological database by conditioning it on strict governance. This approach is reflected in regulatory frameworks like the US Common Rule, which mandate ERB oversight for secondary biospecimen use, and Europeans' recommendation, which enforce transparency, removal rights, and donor recontact protocols. However, these frameworks are deeply rooted in Western individualism. To balance this, the H3 Africa initiative and the WHO 2021 reintroduced a collective dimension to accommodate no Western context. Traditionally, in many African villages, research access depends entirely on the chief's approval. After receiving a symbolic gift, the king will gather his community and say, "These researchers standing before you have come to our village to vaccine us with a new experimental malaria vaccine. I inform you that your king, who I am, has accepted this new vaccine." And the population responded together, "Our king has accepted the new vaccine, we accepted it." Well, culturally significant, this traditional collective dynamic can only serve as a preliminary step. Global bioethics imperatively requires that it concludes in individual free and informed consent, ensuring every participant retain personal autonomy and a full understanding of the research implications. Consequently, H3 Africa establishes community engagement as an ethical prerequisite to respect local tradition without sacrificing individual rights. Complementing this, the WHO advocates for layered consent, a model optimized by modern digital technologies. Ultimately, this paradigm successfully reconciled individualism, autonomy, cultural sensibility, and scientific flexibility. These three pillars have become inseparable and essential for the ethical advancement of global genomic research. Second, distributive justice versus extractive model. Beyond simply redefining consent, the shift from individualistic research to a community-based approach requires rethinking the symmetry of exchanges. Long marked by scientific extractivism, genomic research is evolving toward effective reciprocity. While the Taipei text established the principle of fairness, contemporarily regulating try to translate it into correct obligatory. The H3 Africa initiative now mandated local capacity building and co-authorship for African researchers. In parallel, the WHO guidelines answering access to benefits as a human right, while the Chinese regulatory document translates this requirement into a strict distributive justice constraint. Any international collaboration must include national scientists and a contractual sharing intellectual property. This normative framework transforms biological material into a sovereign heritage, ensuring that innovations finally benefit source population and not exclusively the global north. 3, biological sovereignty and legal enforceability. For this distributive justice not to remain theoretical, it must be supported by mechanisms of legal enforceability capable of compelling international actors. In China, the research and management of genetic resources established genetic resource as a sovereign heritage, protected by heavy criminal penalties against illegal export. In the United States, common rule use a federal financial level, NEH. Any violation of the rules of consent or sharing result in the freezing of credit de facto, imposing these standards on a global scale. Although the Nagoya Protocol 2010 historically applies to biodiversity, expressly excluding the human genome, its founding principle of access and benefit sharing now permit the governance of biobanks. European recommendation and an H3 Africa initiative secure exchange through legally binding material and data transfer agreement. Supervised by data access committees, this contract guarantees the traceability of biomedical data and prohibits its commercialization without prior agreement. This architecture, combining hard law and private law, safeguards the sovereignty of the population of origin against the unilateral exploitation of global genomic resources. Conclusion. The Taipei Declaration serves as a fundamental ethical framework for protecting patient privacy, informed consent within biobanks and health database. However, because it operates as soft law, it lacks the binding legal authority and enforcement mechanism necessary to regulate modern research effectively. To meet the challenges posed by disruptive technologies, the Taipei Declaration must be updated with 4 key ethical amendments. First, distributive justice and reciprocity. Drawing inspiration from Nagoya Protocol, this amendment will require equitable sharing of clinical and scientific benefits. It aims to eliminate North-South extractivism by mandating co-authorship and the contractual sharing of intellectual property. 2, dynamic consent, interacting a digital, evolving and layered consent model that ensures continuous transparency and is inextricably linked to systematic community engagement. 3, biological sovereignty elevation, omic data and biological sample to the status of a sovereign and inalienable heritage of source population. At the end, binding governance, systematizing legally enforceable MTA, DTA under strict IRB and ethics committee oversight guarantees absolute resource traceability. You can see Council of Europe 2018. By interacting this update, health data governance can transition from purely philanthropic guidelines to legally enforceable protection. As a full professor of molecular genetics and researcher in the field of genomics, I have had the opportunity to contribute to the development of the WHO's 2021 genetic editing document and to participate in the work of the Council of Europe in Strasbourg on genetic and ethics, representing the Vatican, the Holy See. In this broad genomic research, it is essential above all to promote justice and equity in sharing not only biobanks data, but also patents and royalties among people who give their sample and researchers. Thank you very much for your attention. I am sorry for my English. Usually we speak French in our country. I can use Italian per criticare la gente. I can criticare the people with Italian. In English, I am very, I don't know how to tell it. It's not good, my English. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jack Simpore. Now we will move to the next lecture by Professor Lara Bloom. She is the President and CEO of the Ehlers-Danlos Society, where she leads global efforts to raise awareness of rare, chronic, and invisible conditions, specializing in Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and other disabilities or diseases like hypermobility, spectrum disorders, and related conditions. She spearheads international medical collaboration, research funding, education, and advocacy. She also serves as vice chair of the board of the International Alliance of Patient Organization and is a board member of Genetic Alliance in UK. A passionate leader in patient engagement and global collaboration, Lara was appointed academic affiliate professor of practice at Penn State College of Medicine in March 2022, marking a decade of work in patient advocacy. She is widely published, and it is an honor to use for us to have her here with us today. Thank you, Lara.
Thank you so much. Okay, have you got the clicker? Thanks so much. Okay, I have no conflicts to declare, just to say I am now the chair of IAPO, and that's who I'll be representing today in this talk. So the declaration, it clearly provides a strong ethical foundation for the governance of health databases and biobanks. We at the Ehlers-Danlos Society have our own registry and biobanks, so drawing on these things is very important. But I think the opportunity in this revision for me is to move from principles of protection towards frameworks of partnership, because that's where equity and shared value are not implied but become embedded. And I think that's still where there are some limitations. So I'm bringing both a systems level and a lived experience lens to the conversation, because for many of us, it's not just theoretical, it's our data, it's our bodies, and our lives that are being contributed. And the question isn't anymore how we protect people, but how do we ensure that they truly share in the value that's being created? And the declaration is built on strong ethical foundations. But that's really, if it doesn't recognize the communities and the importance of benefit sharing, that's what matters. And it's really only part of the story. The lived experience reality is also quite different. People give their data, they contribute it often with a lot of hope. We often hear of survey fatigue, but in areas such as rare disease like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, we'll put a survey out, we'll put an option to join a registry, and there are often thousands of people that join within a week. People are desperate to give something to get something back. But too often they don't hear back. They don't know how their data is used. They don't know what benefit from it is created. So there's that gap between the promise and reality, and that's what I think we need to address. So does the declaration fall short? I think it's strong on protection, as I said. It safeguards dignity, privacy, consent, but it's much less developed when it comes to how benefits are shared, how people stay engaged, and how power is then distributed. So it protects people from harm, but yet doesn't really ensure how they can then share in the value. And consent, it's a moment, it's not a relationship. And I think there's a lot of fear when it comes to reconsenting that you will lose people. But I think that is a fear that the risk should be taken with that, because people's situations do change. People's opinions on being on these kind of databases do change, and consent is central in the declaration. But as with majority of all enrollment activity, it is treated as a one-time event. And once you sign, your data can be used in ways you may not fully understand, and often without further engagement. And from a lived experience perspective, that doesn't feel like control. It feels like letting go and losing sight entirely. At the Society, we have 3 legacy registers in total. We have 26,000 people on our registry combined, which is an impressive number for a global rare disease registry. But we did an exercise trying to actually live through a lived experience lens recently of reconsenting. And that number has gone down to 8,000. But that's 8,000 people that still readily want to be included and have consented to the latest, that we're putting out there for people that are joining the registry now. And I think people shouldn't be scared to do that exercise, because it is really, truly then a partnership and involving people that are living with these conditions. And then again, back to this protection but not empowerment, it does recognize communities, especially vulnerable ones, and it does call for the protection in the declaration, but it doesn't define what meaningful benefit sharing looks like or how communities participate in decisions. So we end up with inclusion in principle but not empowerment, and I think that is the problem, because participation without power is not truly equity. And we've spoken a lot about the global reality. Data often flows from patients, underserved communities, lower resource settings, into systems where innovation happens elsewhere. Benefits are not equitably returned, and the Declaration does acknowledge risk of exploitation, but it doesn't yet operationalize how to prevent it. So how can we really think past that? And then extraction to shared value. And I think this is really a necessary shift. Not data as something taken, but data as something shared in a partnership, where people remain connected, informed, and valued. And I think as soon as the human sends that consent, submits whatever it is, whether it's data or samples, they no longer are a human. They're a number, they're de-identified, and we need to humanize the participants still, and let us constantly remember that it's not data is king, more numbers, better research that comes out of it, because of course that's the aim. You need to get as many people in there as possible. But we need to remember that every de-identified number is a human being, and someone that would probably really appreciate a little bit more empowerment and shared ownership. So what could change? Some recommendations. I would say a clear definition of what benefit sharing is, transparency on how data is used and what comes from it, real co-governance, not just participation, and explicit attention to global inequities, which we have talked about a lot today. But I think it is not unique to this in literature, in medical libraries, in our own registry in Biobank. It's the privileged white person in geographies that are not representative of all that you see in all of these places. And how do we actually move that needle? How do we shift beyond that? I think it's very difficult to answer that, and it's even more challenging in the landscape that we're in right now. But if we want people to share their data, we must be willing to share the power and the benefits. And one could argue that the Declaration's role is to just govern ethical collection, but in today's data ecosystem, the ethical implications extend far beyond that moment. And the real impact, both positive and negative, emerges in how the data is used, shared, and translated into value. Because if we stop at collection, we risk protecting process without addressing the outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we open both lectures for discussion.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bloom. I have a very specific question. It has to do with the challenge of recredentialing or reconsenting. You said 26,000 were in your data bank and you reconsented 8,000. Of the ones that did not reconsent, how many of them were simply no response, or you were unable to find them, and how many of them deliberately withdrew their consent?
So I don't have the exact numbers of that, but I know the majority was more that we just did not hear back. So it's hard to know whether it's because people just chose not to versus that their email was no longer valid and so on. So it's still a stark number. We constantly email, use every contact system we have to get to those people still. And the numbers do creep up slowly. But I think it's a stark enough difference to acknowledge that things do change over time.
So as a follow-up, can you or perhaps one of the other panelists comment about the ethics, if you will, of the option to withdraw as a factor of your initial consent that includes, if you wish to ever withdraw your consent, contact us at such and such, putting the responsibility onto the patient. Can you comment about the workability and the ethics of perhaps that option?
So we have that exact option on our registry and biobank, where we have in the consent, and we have on our web pages, if people want to remove themselves, they can at any time. I think that that ethically is an appropriate thing to do, but I think the reality is it's back to that thing that it's a one-time event. So when people, it's not you're going to regularly check the website of the, you know, where you signed up for. It's not that you're going to be thinking all the time, do I want to come out there? We've had probably in the 5 to 8 years that we've had the registry in some form, we've had under 10 people do that. So it's a very small amount that actually want to remove themselves so much that they will go out of their way to do it. But I think then when you give people an option, and you're often talking about people who are fatigued, who are living with chronic health conditions, that even doing something like sending an email is work for them. If you then give them the option of just kind of, they're out of it if they don't reply, and then you look at those numbers, I think that's something to acknowledge and keep in mind for kind of that ethical responsibility. And, you know, I think that we did this for 2 reasons. One, we moved from an external registry to an internal REDCap registry, so we had to reconsent, but we could have done it in a different way where we would have had less dropout. We intentionally did it this way to try and prove what we were saying, really, that you really should give that option more regularly. How often would I like to do that? I also have a registry where I need as much data in there as possible. It's not an attractive thing to do that regularly, but I think it's the right moral thing to do, to not just have it as a one-time thing. And there's other ways we're thinking about doing it, so regularly connecting with the people, and rather than assuming that they're not in it unless they reconsent, giving regular communications more proactively about that option, that you can come out of it and why you're on it, what outcomes are coming from it. And I think that's probably the way we'll go forward, but even that is not the norm of what's happening in most registries and data sets.
This is a question, or 2 questions for Lara. In my understanding, I have a good relationship with the platforms of patients in Spain. So, the problem is not, they are lucky, or they want to share their data with, because they think my data is able to solve the disease of others. I don't want the others to suffer what I have suffered. So the problem is not about informed consent, because at the end, if we are going to accept a dynamic out-of system, we are accepting the people can be not solidar with the others, can be saying, no, I don't want to participate. So I think that the problem is mainly about the benefits. The benefits not for the individual, but the benefits for the community. So the industrial companies, they are going to receive a lot of from the patients, data, samples, and in exchange, they need to offer to the market products in a way which could be acceptable for everybody, not for only. So I think that the problem, more than informed consent, is confidentiality on the one hand, anonymization and pseudonymization, and to develop this kind of commitment about benefits for the community. And the second question is about also informed consent. I think that we are talking about informed consent in a new era, in the times of digitalization, where informed consent is an old friend, which was really an excuse to talk. Was an excuse, the value is not the proper informed consent, it's the conversation, it's an excuse to talk with the physician, to have a conversation, to share values, to share fears. But now in this world, informed consent is a mere formal requirement, because dynamic up-out is not a real conversation. As you said, it's 1 minute where I am accepting every week a terrible informed consent and I don't have time to read. So I think that we need to understand informed consent is not our old friend from the 70s, 80s. It's something new that perhaps is not going to be anymore what it has been in the physician-patient relationship. So perhaps we need to talk more about benefits for the community and to talk about confidentiality, no autonomy, confidentiality. These are two questions.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. I think, as I said at the beginning, when we put out an option to join anything, the influx is huge because people are desperate to make an impact on both their lives and the communities and be part of research and change. So I think if there was an increase in communication of sharing the benefits more regularly, not just at the time of consent and the time of joining of what it could be, but I think that's what's lacking, the continued partnership of whoever gives data and who is receiving it, whether that's through regular consent, regular updates. It doesn't need to necessarily be regular consent, but it's usually nothing after that first point of contact because people are dehumanized as soon as they're turned into data. And I think that's what's important here and that's what's missing, is that humanization and continuization of that communication, whether it's benefits, updates, what's come out of it. That's the opportunity here. And I think you'll get a lot more buy-in and you'll get a lot more people willing to do it, because you're right. Most people don't even read the consent they tick these days. They're so, quick to do it. We're all doing it all day long. Just fill in a tick box. So it's less about that. I think it's more about that shared partnership that's missing right now.
So thank you very much. I'm sorry so many times. My name is Chieko Kurihara, Clinical Evaluation Journal Editor, and I completely agree with you both of the speakers. And Lola's talk is just the same as Japanese patient group. And also, I completely agree with Dr. Jack Simpor to your argument about the Nagoya Protocol to implement human genetics. We had a webinar with indigenous people, and their argument is just the same as there is insufficient benefit sharing from the research with the industrialized researchers. So we are going to publish a joint statement that Nagoya Protocol should be implemented to human genetics, and also Taipei Declaration should be the role of human version of Nagoya Protocol. And I'd like to ask your opinion on this point. And also, I searched there are some sovereign approach of African countries to implement the legal system of just the same as Nagoya Protocol in countries. So this is a very technical question. And sorry, a Taipei Declaration is a Nagoya Protocol, the human version.
No questions? Okay. Yes, please.
Well, thank you very much. I think when we speak about informed consent, I see the analogy with Winston Churchill quote on, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. Informed consent has been under attack from the beginning of the history of research, but also in medical practice. Nevertheless, it is still there, and I'm very happy it is still there. Thank you for your presentation, Lara Bloom, because you are suggesting the capacity of investing more resource and more time to interact with the participants. And this made me think about one element that we have discussed previously today on governance. We should not be addressing only researchers or the sponsors and so on, but I think that the funding agencies and all the stakeholders actually should commit themselves to adopt the principles that we are talking about, in the sense that, especially on one of the elements you mentioned, the equity impact assessment. A research ethics committee cannot do an equity impact assessment because we see the protocol one after the other. It's not a program. It's only those who are writing the research strategy in the institution or the funding agency or at the state level who have this capacity. So, sorry for this broad comment, but my point is really what you are suggesting for this long-term interaction with the patients, with the participants. We can actually create a long-term collaboration between all the stakeholders in the governance process. This is another approach that we haven't addressed, and I don't see how we can do it in the Declaration of Taipei, but maybe you have a solution.
You know, I think the solution to most things when it comes to working out the best way to get past these challenges is moving from tokenism to true participation with people with lived experience. You know, timing is everything. If we stop thinking about participants as patients and start thinking of them as people, we're only patients when we're in front of a doctor. That's it. Other than that, we're all patients at one point. It's people, and their whole experience of living with a condition, from working, being a partner, being a parent, and being a patient. It's all encompassing, and that will determine what they want to get out of being a participant in something like this and what is important to them. And so if the person is included in all of these processes, the creation of all of these declarations from the very, very start as co-creators, and actually being part of building the table and not just having a seat round it, then we may move to a point where we actually are delivering what people need and want versus assuming what they need and want and then asking them to check whether they got it right or not.
I have an online question that I'd like to read before we get to the next questioner. This is from an online participant in Japan, and we, just so folks know, do have a number of people participating online. And the question reads, "Thank you for your insightful presentations. I have a question regarding the relationship between data monetization and benefit sharing. Recent reports of biobank-derived data being advertised for sale online have raised concerns about the commercialization of health data. Meanwhile, the EU Data Governance Act has introduced the concept of data altruism. As health data and biobank resources are increasingly generating economic value, should the Declaration of Taipei address this data monetization and commodification? If so, how should it approach these issues from an ethical perspective, particularly when data monetization may be pursued not only by commercial entities, but also by patient and advocacy communities?" Thank you.
I mean, I can have a stab at commenting on that. I don't think there's an answer to that, to be honest. It's we are approached often, you know, 25,000 plus on a legacy registry, and growing on a rare disease is not common, and we have a lot of assets that are attractive to industry, and we have something that we have currently ensured our community that we're not monetizing the data in our registry or biobank. And that is true as it stands, but in an evolving world where we have no federal funding, there's very little grants and foundations, and we're reliant on individual donors that are struggling themselves because of the global geopolitical landscape. One has to say, how sustainable is that model? And if it's for the greater good of then, for example, for us, having a non-profit that allows us to keep doing the work that supporting the people living with the condition, I don't think it should be a black and white thing. I think it should be opt-in, without a doubt. So I think, you know, people have the choice whether their data could be monetized if they're explained clearly what that would be for and what that looks like. As I said, right now it's not something we're doing, but I can't honestly say it's not something we won't do. And I think we have to be real that we're living in a world where data is very valuable.
I would like to ask Professor Farouk to translate. My English is not very hard to explain myself. I will use Italian or French. Voilà. Merci beaucoup. Pour ce qui concerne le protocole de Nagoya,
concerning Nagoya Protocol,
et ça se rapporte à tous les autres, les êtres vivants.
It's in relation to all living human beings.
Sauf les humains.
All living.
Les êtres vivants, tous les êtres vivants, sauf.
Every living creature, but not human.
Voilà. Donc, Nagoya protège pratiquement les résultats de recherche sur le génome des êtres vivants. Il promeut le partage, il promeut la conservation, les divisions des royalties, tout. Et donc, voilà.
So, Nagoya Protocol is dealing with protecting human beings, the human genome, their reservation, their keeping it for useful use, participation, etc.
Voilà. Pour ce qui concerne ce qu'on vient de dire, la question qu'il a posée.
Concerning what was just mentioned.
Et ce qui est important actuellement, c'est qu'il faut qu'on retienne.
What is important now, what to take care of it.
Ce qu'on doit améliorer.
What we have to make better.
Dans le protocole de Taipei.
In Taipei Declaration.
C'est vraiment appuyer sur la justice distributive.
Is to focus on distributive.
Justice distributive.
Justice distribution.
La réciprocité.
And reciprocity.
Ça c'est un. Deux.
This is one. Number two.
On doit aussi mettre l'accent sur le consentement.
We have to put focus and stress on human consent.
Le consentement libre et éclairé.
Because it leads to freedom and clarification, clarify.
Mais pour nous du Sud,
but for us from the South,
comme vous avez vu le H3 Africa,
as you have seen H3 Africa,
ce qui est important,
what is important,
c'est la souveraineté.
It's sovereignty.
Donc, tout, que ce soit les plantes, que ce soit les animaux, que ce soit l'homme, ce qui est important.
So everything, plants, animals, human beings.
Ce qui importe, tout c'est l'ADN, le génome, ça appartient aux nations.
So everything, the LDL, the genome, is property of the nation.
Et c'est le même cas en Russie, que vous avez vu rules qu'on a cité. C'est la même chose que promeut l'OMS dans son document. C'est un produit de souveraineté. Donc, voilà.
So it's sovereignty, as you have seen in the vaccine, as you have seen in the WHO, it's a problem of sovereignty of the nation.
Donc, on ne peut pas prendre un échantillon, aller l'étudier, faire la recherche, trouver les vaccins, breveter, avoir des royalties, sans que les peuples qui ont contribué à donner les échantillons.
So we cannot have the sample, go to the laboratory research, make result, make the brevet, and then without involving the nation from where we have got the samples for research.
Voilà. Donc, il y a aussi la question de gouvernance.
Also, we have the governance.
Donc, il faudra qu'il y ait, par exemple, après l'échantillonnage,
so after taking the samples,
et après le séquençage,
then the second,
le séquençage de l'ADN,
yes,
after sequencing DNA, après avoir séquencé l'ADN, il faudra qu'il y ait une banque de données.
Then after the first samples and the DNA research, we have to create, to have in place a bank.
Et donc, soit ceux qui ont donné les échantillons, soit ceux qui doivent l'utiliser pour, par exemple, des vaccins, des découvertes, doivent s'entendre pour l'utiliser.
So from those we have taken the sample, or from those after the research they will profit. They have to be in link together.
Parce que
to communicate.
Il faudra aller au-delà de l'extractivisme que nous avons vu, à la cohésion, à la synthèse, pour qu'il y ait entre les deux, les donneurs de l'échantillon et ceux qui l'utilisent, qu'ils parlent le même langage, que ce soit vraiment équitable le partage des bénéfices.
So to be equity, instead of separation between the donor and the receiver, we make more collaboration, more cohesion, more relation together.
Je pense que pour terminer,
I think
et Taipei a bien affirmé cela, mais on doit aller. Ça fait 10 ans.
So Taipei did his work in more than 10 years, but we have to go further.
Parce que depuis 2016 à maintenant, ça fait 10 ans, la génétique a fait des sauts énormes. Donc,
so since 2016, genetics has done marvelous steps forward.
Donc, il faudra qu'on évolue et qu'on précise.
We have to make evolution to go further.
Qu'on précise les terminologies.
And to be precise on terminology of terms.
Pour que quand même la recherche
the research
soit vraiment effectuée dans la sérénité.
Could be really successful and productive serenity.
Je m'excuse, c'est ça que je voulais dire, mais nous ne possédons pas bien la langue de Shakespeare.
Is that what I wanted to say?
J'utilise la langue de Voltaire. Merci beaucoup.
I am using the Voltaire language.
Merci.
No, now my question is at the end. So thanks for Professor Sempore and Ms. Lara Bloom. Really concerning the profit for the individual and persons. And concerning Declaration of Taipei, I think if we go before in the 90s, we were speaking about quality management, and you remember Avidais Donabedian, who was very active in North Africa, Middle East region. And we have many of the items so important, focus on individual, benefit, communication, community. We have all this, then we have Taipei, but I will focus on person, profit, benefit. As Laura, she mentioned it about rare disease. In many countries, now it's a very serious problem, especially the muscle dystrophy, the severe cases who are dying in less than 2 years, and a drug costs $2 million the injection. They share in the research, and then they are waiting profit. It is not a profit for the sick person, it's for the whole family. Legal issue, interest of ministries of health, they cannot support. So I am sharing what helped in supporting and how to introduce something like that in Declaration of Taipei. It was the community, far away from the person. Second, communication. They did in some countries a series for 30 or 60 episodes speaking about the suffering. And this helped to some extent. I cannot see this where, well, we are saying contribution, communication, but it should be more specific, and the role of Ministry of Health, role of syndicate or association, to support these families. They are contributing in research, and when it comes what we can do for them, they are abandoned. This also will be highlighted also tomorrow in governance. Thank you.
Thank you. Otmar?
We have one at the back first.
Otmar. Yes. Oh, I didn't see her.
Yeah?
Okay, yes.
Okay, thank you. So this afternoon session, thank you very much for your presentations. I really enjoyed listening to this. I'm still struggling a little bit with the concept of how benefits derived from health databases and biobanks can be shared fairly with the contributing individuals and communities. Because within the context of South Africa, a lot of our, well, let's just say our GCP guidelines and our research ethics guidelines speak to the benefit. What is a benefit? There is no benefit consideration. We only compensate or reimburse for time, inconvenience, and expenses that the participant has incurred. And that is the narrow view that we've taken because we are trying to avoid the exploitation component. So yes, the protectionism mechanism is highly enforced, I would say. My question to you then to ask, because a lot of the literature that's coming out in South Africa is trying to interrogate this issue of benefit sharing in the context of health databases and biobanks, but a lot of it's also being conflated or contextualized around biodiversity and the Nagoya Protocol. I don't know if that's the right answer to address the issue of benefit sharing. So my question is, where we say how benefits can be shared, should we not be also asking what benefits are we talking about or can be shared in that context? Thank you.
I absolutely agree, and that will be different for each thing. I don't think it's just a blanket, a registry will give this benefit or a biobank will give another. I think it's dependent on who's owning that, for what disease area. So I think that shouldn't just be a blanket what. But I think you're absolutely right. We do need to think about that. I think for me, let's forget what word comes next, whether it's consent or benefit. It's the one time that I think is the problem. It's that initial communication and then that's it. And I think if there was just a way that whatever infrastructure was in place to regularly update and inform the people that were on there, and some do it, but most don't, and it's not even prioritized when building these things, that would be a really good way to getting close to it being a shared benefit, because it's like, oh, I'm being updated regularly of what's happening with my data. How good, how nice, how rewarding, that's really worth it, and that's a benefit. Just psychologically and emotionally, just knowing what research is coming out of something, what lives you may have improved. I mean, I think that goes a huge way and would mean more to many people than monetary compensation or benefits. So I think it's the one time that's the problem for me.
Thank you. I think I will go into the same direction and a little bit a critical question concerning the benefit and the benefit sharing. Going a step back to the Declaration of Helsinki and the classical experimental situation of doing a clinical trial or an experiment, a physical experiment with patients or with volunteers. There was for a long time a phenomenon that we have discussed as therapeutical misconception, having a benefit out of participation in a physical experiment, which we know isn't by no means guaranteed and very often not existing. Actually, very often trials show that drugs may not work or may not work in the way that was expected, so that is maybe actually negative from what you have and what you experience with that, which we believe that people have to be informed about and must know before they enter into a clinical trial or into an experimentation at all. We have, for the situation of databases and biobanks, therefore also never spoken about informed consent, because there is no informed consent, very simple. You cannot inform about the benefits, or you cannot inform about the dangers, the possible burdens from the experimentation or from the analysis that will be done with those data or samples in the future. It's completely impossible. So what we speak about is a consent, and that consent can be valid if a proper information about the governance that is being connected to the process is then being given, which then the person who donates the data, and we have uncoupled this also from its role of a patient into a donor role, and maybe we have to speak about sharing in the future, I don't know. But it is important to understand that at that point it is not possible to promise anything about benefits or to warn against any burdens that come. And it is more important then to have a governance in place which takes care of those aspects in the future. As our life is limited, however, the specimen or data may stay in a database much longer than those who have donated it. It is important that others, namely such an ethics committee or review committee or access committee, can take this role of continuation into that. And that was the idea which was behind this structure for that. So the continuation lies rather in the governance process than in this individual dialogue between the donator or sharer of the sample or the data in the beginning. At least that was the concept behind it. I agree with you. There are more questions to be asked about sharing of benefit, but to what I have said, probably the idea is more a collective sharing than any individual result that can be shared. And I think this is also the idea behind the Declaration of Helsinki, that we are talking about the collective question and not that much about the individual that comes in there. Number one, that would be my first one, whether you agree to that or whether you believe it's more on the individual level. However, I think there are aspects which are individual, and those are, for instance, the question whether there are individual findings which come out of any processing of the data or the specimen in the future. Incidental findings are the classical example for that. There may be other things that come out which maybe feed feedback. What we see right now is, and I think we had to accept that in the past, is that many of the databases said, and biobanks said, we cannot inform you because we don't have the capacity to do so. We have money to store the material, the data. We have funds to allow to do research with it or can release it for that, but we have not the capacity to write to individuals and to ask and to give information feedback. Now, that may be something where in the times of information age we can say that's no longer an argument because you can do this electronically, you can use AI to help you with that. It's not something that is really impossible now. But still we have a lot of data, and probably the majority, which do not promise you anything to be heard back as you criticize them. I understand your plaidoyer for saying that must change, and there should be some way of sharing with that. Again, my question is that really everything to the individual, or is that sharing like we see it in the Declaration of Helsinki, a sharing with the collective, the group, or the general broad population with that? Finally, it's not a far remote problem as some people may think it is. I just recently saw from a university in my vicinity a statement: you are a patient of our institution, you give us your data and we can use your data, period. No explanation of a process of governance of anything else. And this was not in an authoritarian state, this was in Switzerland. So I would agree with you that some things have to change, but my key question is rather, are we going very much to the individual level, or is this more a collective approach?
Thank you. I totally agree it should be collective. I don't think it's sustainable or realistic to be individual. And I think we need to tone down what we mean by benefit, I think, because to the average person who may give a sample to a biobank, that's like something they've never done in their life before or may not do again, and to them that's a huge thing. And even on an annual basis, receiving an email that collectively updates them on what's been happening with the biobank, what research has been done, nothing about them as an individual, would go so far that people just wouldn't comprehend what that would mean to people. And I think when we think benefit, we're thinking monetary, we're thinking, tell me about exactly what my, blood or plasma or urine has done. No, I don't think that's what people are expecting, and that's certainly not what I mean. I think incidental finding is very, very different when you're doing, whole genomes and things like that. I think that's different. But I do think it's that communication bit, the regularity of it, and moving past one time.
I have another online question. Thank you to the World Medical Association for organizing these important expert meetings and enabling online participation. I am, and here I apologize for my pronunciation, Dr. Fulgenci Nkikabahizi, the Vice President of the Rwandan Medical Association. I particularly appreciated the statement, if we want people to share their data, we must be willing to share power and the benefits. My question is, if research participants cannot see in real time who is accessing their data for what purpose and under which consent conditions, can consent truly remain ongoing and informed? Should the revised WMA Declaration of Taipei encourage auditable real-time consent dashboards or participant-centered monitoring systems that will allow individuals to track, modify, or withdraw consent? Should IRBs also be supported by an independent third party to provide real-time auditing of compliance with consent preferences?
I think that would be ideal. I don't think it's realistic at all, unfortunately. I think there's not the capacity or the frameworks to support that. I think, is that something that could and should be best practice? Absolutely. I'd love to see examples of that being done, but I'm also a realist, and I know that even in our organization, if I turn around to my research department and said we needed to do that, they would not be very happy with me, because it's a huge amount of work and undertaking and development of a platform that would encourage that. So to put it in the declaration as that being how it should be, I think is not realistic in the time we're living in right now. But I think to make that statement true, that's the kind of way and direction we should be moving towards, of thinking as we are in a world where platforms and development and coding is pretty simple and can be done probably with AI developing that sort of thing. Can we start to model what great looks like and not be put off by the fact that it's a lot of work, and then gradually kind of leading by example, more and more people could take that on. But I think it's premature to do that now.
Thank you very much. We have now three speakers. We have two on the audience. So let's start with the first one and the second and the third. And we have only 5 minutes to finish our meeting. So everyone have 1 minute and a half.
Okay, I will keep that in mind. My name is Antina de Jong from the Netherlands. Well, we heard a lot about equity and the wishes. I also favored the quote, if we want people to share their data, we must be willing to share the power and the benefits. But my question is, how do we bring that about, given the current reality of commercialization of data, acting as if they own it and sell it for a high price? We give it for nothing, and they sell it for a high price. Above that, in current times, we see a phenomenon of sphere transgression, especially healthcare commercialization and business influence each other, and mostly the business influence politics around the world. So my central question is, how do we change as a WMA, and with the Declaration of Taipei, really bring something about to that real equity will occur? We know the existing databases are very biased, so do we have to throw these big databases away and start all over again? So how do we actually do this?
Very nice to hear you all. Merci beaucoup. Je parlais pas. So I'm going to speak English, if anybody can tell you. And I'm concerned about that what should I say? Inability. Oh, you cannot, oh my God. The word is hard to me too. I'm Brazilian, so you cannot annihilate or annihilate. Oh, well, you have an owner of your genetics material. That's your statement. So he cannot. Oh, so sorry. He cannot be transferred to other people. So it's a kind of ownership. In the culture, you told us all the elements, the earth, and all together, it's a part of one thing. For our indigenous people too, every culture have their own idea about this composition. My question is, how can we separate? How can we separate the culture from the molecular itself, a genetics molecular issue, and the trademark, or in other words, the capital? It's a million question, but I'd like to hear you a little bit more. And one just last statement to Lara. Lara, I think the benefit sharing we can feel throughout the time. I'm not defending not having benefit sharing, but I think throughout the time we have several benefits from several research. Everyone, not just people related to the clinical trial or wherever a protocol was. And I believe from now and then we would have to develop the idea that we cannot control more those things. I believe that with AI and genetics issue, we cannot have the control, and you need to tell the participant, you know, you are going to give me your data, and I'll try my best to protect all the rights you have. You know, for me, it sounds better to clarify that we cannot guarantee the benefit sharing and several other things. Thank you.
Italian or French?
No, I will do in French.
Okay.
Donc, merci pour la question. Et ce qui est sûr.
Thanks for the question. What is sure?
Et vous savez, au niveau de l'Afrique, quand le chef a parlé, tout
in
le
Africa, when the chief has spoken,
tout le monde accepte.
Everybody has to accept.
Mais si le chef refuse, pratiquement tout le monde refuse.
If the chief refuses, everybody has to refuse.
Donc, si le chef avait refusé le vaccin, tout le monde allait refuser.
So, if the chief has refused the vaccine, everybody will not accept the vaccine.
C'est pourquoi H3 Africa,
for this reason, H3 Africa
et l'OMS
and WHO
on dit que chaque projet doit tenir compte de la culture.
So they have mentioned that every project has to take into consideration the culture, locality, local place,
et l'autonomie des personnes individuelles,
person autonomy,
et les exigences de la science.
Et
les exigences.
And science exigence.
Sans ces trois éléments,
without these three elements,
c'est difficile de pouvoir contenter tout le monde.
It's very difficult to please every person.
Si on accepte ce que le chef a dit sans tenir compte le consentement individuel, ça ne peut pas marcher.
So if we have to accept what the chief has said, without putting into consideration the individual consent, it will not succeed.
Et je profite pour répondre à une question qu'on avait posée.
And I will profit to answer another question that it was raised.
Tout le monde sait que quand on fait la recherche,
everybody knows that when we do research,
il y a l'aspect éthique et bioéthique.
There is the ethical and bioethical aspects.
Donc, du point de vue éthique,
so from the point of ethical point of view,
ce que nous faisons, par exemple, en Afrique, peut-être même c'est ailleurs,
what we are doing in Africa and maybe also in other places,
et les malades qui viennent, on peut leur payer l'essence ou, par exemple, après avoir fait quelque chose, le pain, quelque chose comme ça. C'est symbolique.
When we receive a patient, we can pay him the transportation or a piece of bread, which is symbolic.
On ne paie pas l'échantillonnage. Il ne donne pas l'échantillon et on paie.
Donc, he is not asked to give the specimen and then to pay to him. No.
Maintenant, ce qui est faisable,
what is workable,
les bénéfices,
the profit,
c'est pour le groupe.
It's for the collectivity, for the group.
Si quelqu'un prend par exemple un exemple en Afrique, prend des échantillons, vient faire un vaccin en Europe.
So if there is someone who is coming in Africa, taking samples and going to Europe to do it, the research,
trouve un vaccin,
and then he will find a vaccine,
il doit réduire le coût au niveau de la population qui a donné les échantillons.
So when he is fixing the price, he has to take into consideration the locality, the group that provided him with the specimen for the research with a special price.
Maintenant, on peut aller plus loin.
Now we can go further.
S'il y a des intérêts, comme on avait dit, les royalties, les choses, il doit quand même tenir compte de la population.
Now, if he has to pay extra money for loyalty, etc., but he has to put into consideration the person, the group in the locality from where he took the material or the specimen.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
No?
I'm okay.
Is there any other question? No? Thank you very much. It was very interesting meeting. Thank you for the audience for very good discussion, and thank to the speakers, excellent speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I listened to you in Geneva during the Red Cross. Yes. Yes. It's good to meet you properly. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Please just, we are at the conclusion on the first day, so part of the first day, because we have also this evening visit of the museum and a reception, a refreshment also this evening. But now to conclude the scientific part of the day, and I invite Diana Ferro. She is a medical doctor and expert in artificial intelligence, biobanks at the Pediatric Hospital Bambino Gesù in Rome. Try to collect some suggestions, ideas and proposals at the end of this day. Please, Dr. Diana.
Well, good evening, everybody. We are always talking about AI, and AI is never in the room, but today the artificial intelligence was in the room. Actually, with me, there were 3 artificial intelligence that I orchestrated by sitting down there. And what I ask AI to do is to act basically as my assistant. So basically, one AI was collecting data, another artificial intelligence was analyzing the data and doing thematic analysis, and the third AI was compiling the slide that you see behind me. Disclaimer, the last artificial intelligence is actually being programmed to be my avatar, so you might see some of my thinking in it because it tends to include that in the reasoning. So I would like first to point out that the figure, you see, data came out between equity and care. It's not connected to either or neither, it's in the middle, you know. And artificial intelligence is actually opposite of equity. And that is very interesting because if we look at the data, we see that the region of our document is an opportunity for a bigger opportunity than privacy. So when a scientist thinks about an ethical committee, always thinks about losing time, have to deal with lawyers, and probably have hard time collecting data, sharing data, treating data. So, however, we know that ethical committees and ethicists give us a very good strength. Protect dignity, autonomy, privacy, confidentiality, and consent. We have now an opportunity to make justice, equity, and accountability operational, and from an health AI officer lens, mean that this document and the other document that are coming at us for policy will help us to govern data, decision, outcome, and benefit. The core message that we identified together as co-scientist systems is that the declaration can indeed evolve from protecting data subjects to governing learning healthcare systems. Why? Because learning healthcare systems are actually the way to deal with science now in clinics and in healthcare institutions. For the key equity challenges, the AI struggle a little, but in the end identify 4 core elements. Representation gaps, we saw in the last talk, minority groups, rural community, migrants, disability, data invisibility that is connected with the representation gap. And here is very interesting the ancestry point of view, and that's why ethnicity and ancestry are divided. Because ethnicity is always reported by the patients or implied by a doctor. So if a doctor sees you based on the color of your skin, will say where you come from, basically. Where the ancestry is designed in your DNA, is the population, your ancestor, where they come from. But then we have benefit gaps. So data biospecimen may flow one way, while clinical scientific authorship, IP, and capacity building benefits flow elsewhere. We saw some example today talking about other countries such as Africa. The consent gap. Protected consent frameworks can unintentionally exclude incapacitated patients. We talk about cognitive, for example, in patients, people requiring support and decision making. So procedural compliance can then indeed hide structural injustice. Everybody knows this. In Italy, we know this very well. 99% of scientists right now will call a specific law in the GDPR that allow us to reuse the data without re-asking for consent. And it's easier because, especially in pediatrics, will you really recall a patient that has a child died of cancer to re-ask for consent? No, it's making something very bad to that family. So we use that law constantly. However, we also know that somehow we are not thinking the overall picture of the family. Maybe that family want to be recalled. So I love the idea of dynamic dashboarding for monitoring consent. We are trying to do that at Bambino Gesù Children's Hospital. It's not so easy to do because a lot of consent is done in paper. And so to go back to the archive and identify which child give consent, having a data lake that started in 2018 is very hard. So why IP fairness here? Well, you know that there is not only the problem of data selling, it's also the model of model selling. So if we use data to develop a new model and then we sell the model to learn from the patients, are we somehow give away the knowledge independently and indirectly? So we have this data paradox. So children, families, patients, and people are protected, however, are still invisible. Therefore, communities are still needed representation, validation, and benefiting from the research, the result of using the data. So we have three main topics here. Sensitivity variables are restricted. We know PHI, HIPAA. Gaps cannot often be detected, and bias can become infrastructure. And I'm sorry to break it to you, but if you think that you're going to use data science to resolve bioinformatics problem, you're wrong. Is that right now you're not only looking to genomic data, you're looking to imaging data, personal record data, sensor data. Is the bioinformatician problem just triplicated, 10 times the problem that you had before, because you have more data sources and more complexity. So we need, in the revision, to have the team of governed privacy preserving, opt-in, self-reported community partner diversity data, where we need to make sure that we are justifying the public benefit and how we are actually preventing the bias in the first place. So artificial intelligence somehow is turning also biobank governance into safety governance. Because as you might notice here, AI is very good, right, to do some things very quickly. Therefore, if it's handled by people that doesn't know how it works, can also make big mistake. Therefore, biobank and registry data increasingly are used to train and validate clinical AI when ethical committees are still struggling to understand what AI is in the first place. It's not their usual statistics. In statistics, if we're looking at machine learning, get very complicated when you generate something new for something that you learn. So model outputs can feed future care decision, and we know the generative AI is a really feeding author model. Therefore, trash feeds trash become a huge problem of trash that hospitals do not know how to handle. So we have the issue of data origin, model use, care impact, and correction. So when we talk about measure, predict, intervene, monitor, revise, and we do this constantly in a learning healthcare system while doing research, while caring for patients, and while trying to survive the economy, it gets very complicated. So therefore, this that we have today is an opportunity to actually contribute into operationalize intervention on the way how people behave in every point of the loop. Therefore, we should be also monitor equity, not only how much a model is good, or how much a population is represented, so the quality of the data. The team is also about power reciprocity, post-extractive research. Basically, you have your data, you take them out, what you do with that. One thing that is very interesting is the idea of stewardship, and that is a problem because we have a field in which we have people that are not trained in bioethics. If you have in the same room a biologist, a medical personnel, and an engineer, you will realize that all these three personalities have very different opinion about data and modeling, and especially who does work on developing healthcare-related modeling often do not understand the mean of failing predicting an outcome, because they don't realize that if you make a mistake, you can kill 1,000 children in 1 second. And they are so abstract to it that they don't understand the magnitude of what they do, especially if you're selling a product. So consent must then include inclusion, not just protection. We talk about that a lot, fair access to participant benefit. The core message here is that consent should not merely authorize the data use, it should help create trustworthy routes into their system. Therefore, I'm coming to your hospital, you're gonna use my data, and I trust you using it because I know that the people that are in the hospital understand what they're touching and what they're doing with it. The revision agenda, these are the 5 revision priorities based on the artificial intelligence reviewed by me. So if they're wrong, I'm sorry. Representatives has a governance obligation, assess inclusion longitudinally, meaning also across time, not only as people. Who is missing, who is underserved, who is exposed to an actual benefit and harm. Require intended user limits, bias assessment, data gap documentation. Create a justice-oriented review of the documents, so define independent reviews as conflict-aware, meaning that you know that whatever you come out with in the documents, someone might interpret that as potentially defining in the bad or in the good way what they are going to do in the forward months. Empowered to monitor secondary use downstream impacts. I love the conversation, and this is the human in the loop. When we talk about secondary uses, that there is not just clinical trial. I will tell you right now, the secondary use that is done on health data right now doesn't really consider clinical trial at all. We are looking to more data. We're looking to medical records. We are looking to imaging data, radiomics data. Those are the data that care for artificial intelligence predictive medicine. Not a clinical trial one, because these are a small pocket of very good curated data that do not tell enough of a patient of the entire complexity. We're looking forward to a one health, one intelligence type of situation, not just to be able to be good on predicting one drug solution. And then for reciprocity and benefit sharing, redress accountability. We'll just jump on the closing reflection from protection to justice-oriented learning. So in a context of a current learning healthcare system, on the current pressure of the artificial intelligence rapid development, we need an ecosystem and we need guidance to make it representative enough, transparent enough, participatory enough, accountability enough, reciprocal enough. Because we know that we will never have perfections, but we need to be good enough to care for patients and their family and put out there the hope and the solution that they need to find in order to live a fulfilling life. So equity is no longer a downstream aspiration, it is a design requirement for the entire system for trustworthy healthcare. And I've finished here.
Thank you very much, Professor Diana Ferro. So we have the impression it was a very intensive day with a lot of ideas, suggestions, proposals, and it is important for the World Medical Association to go in this process to review and to improve the Declaration of Taipei. So for today it is enough, okay, and now we have a short rest and we have the appointment at 6:15 for our evening together. Many thanks to all speakers, all moderators, the staff, particularly Sani, Michelle and Gaetano. And so Gaetano is there specific information and we can go. Many thanks to the President of World Medical Association.
have
Please.
a few housekeeping announcements. So this evening, for those who have registered for the Vatican Museums tour and dinner, the meeting point is at 6:15 p.m. at the main entrance of the Vatican Museums on Viale Vaticano. You should have received the second email from Sunny with the correct map links and GPS coordinates for that as well. Please wear your badge so that you can be identified as part of the group. And tomorrow the meeting is at 9 a.m. For the start of the second day of sessions. And on Wednesday, for those attending the general audience with the Holy Father, the meeting point is at 8 a.m. at the Perugino Vatican entrance on Via della Stazione Vaticana. Please also wear your badge for that, and keep in mind that we will need to stay outdoors for about 3 hours, so it's advisable to wear a hat and also to bring plenty of patience. We will repeat this announcement tomorrow, and you will receive the same information via email.
Thank you very much.